Let's take you live to Hobart now. The opposition leader Anthony Albanese is addressing the media.
A pitiful amount of money brought forward at a time where we know the economy is sluggish. We know that the MyEFO forecast just this week showed growth lower than it was anticipated in May. Unemployment higher, wages lower. What we have from this government is complacency. We also have, of course, the state governments will be impacted by the lower GST receipts as a result of the downgrade in retail spending and economic activity. But what we have is a complacent government, a government that's still on its victory lap. This was promised not before the last election, this was promised by the coalition before the election, before the last election. This is just absurd that a simple project like fixing this roundabout, this choke point, can't be fixed in the interests of efficiency, but also in the interests of road safety. But it's symptomatic of their approach. When I head into Hobart after this press conference, I'll once again look at Macquarie Point and just wonder how it is that $50 million that was contributed in 2012 from the federal government for seed funding to get that urban redevelopment project and renewal project going has not led to any activity whatsoever after all of that time. So I think that the coalition need to be held to account, and will continue to do it by pointing out that gap between what they say they will do and what actually happens. Happy to take questions.
What else are you doing in Hobart today?
Today I'll be having various meetings today with business. Later this evening I'll be attending a Christmas event attended by Labor Party members. I've got other media appointments both today and tomorrow morning. This is my third visit to Tasmania as leader of the Labor Party. I intend to be a very regular visitor here, and I always enjoy my time here in this great state, and I look forward to engaging with people this afternoon.
The latest figures from the International Energy Agency point to surging demand for Australian coal exports. To what extent are you comfortable, or is the Labor Party comfortable with Australia exporting more coal in the coming years?
I've made my position very clear last week. The issue of coal will depend upon demand, and Australia exporting coal doesn't create demand. That demand comes from international partners for that resource, like other resources as well. So I'm pleased in terms of jobs being created. You expect the International Energy Agency to be pro-energy.
And just to finish up on that, I mean, if there is such a demand, what's your position on new coal mines in Queensland, New South Wales and elsewhere?
I've said that continually for the last week. The government doesn't build coal mines. So they go through the environmental approval processes, and those processes take place. Once they're approved, the mines can go ahead.
But you're the alternative leader of the country. You must have a position on whether new coal mines are a good idea or not.
Well, that's a matter for the market. Labor or coalition don't build new coal mines. What I've said is that in Australia, quite clearly, there's not a market for a new coal-fired power station here. If there was, then business would have invested in it.
The Prime Minister's been heavily criticised on social media for going on holiday while New South Wales faces what's been described as unprecedented bushfires. What's your view on that?
Look, I have many criticisms of Scott Morrison. One of them isn't when he chooses to go on leave with his family. People are entitled to have leave, and that's a matter for him when he takes it. My criticism of him is about his complacency and his failure in areas like this, his failure to develop a national economic plan to deal with the sluggish economy, his failure to have a national drought strategy, his failure to have a national energy policy. What this government is doing is essentially engaged in a victory tour since May, rather than actually doing on the economic front, the environmental front, or on the social policy front, where we have had an inadequate response to the interim report on aged care. On my last visit here, I was with Julie and Brian, where we launched a petition about acting now on those interim recommendations. So far, the response of the government has been inadequate.
Populated regions, including Sydney, Canberra and central towns on the east coast of Australia, have been shrouded in smoke for weeks. How concerned are you about the risks to health that could have if it lingers for longer?
Look, it is already having. It's not a matter of risk. It is having an impact on people's health. People are reporting increased numbers turning up at hospitals, visiting their doctors. Kids are having their Christmas pageants and concerts cancelled if they're outdoors. Parents are keeping their kids inside. In Canberra last night, a Carol's was cancelled. In Sydney, similar things are happening. This is a crisis has occurred. On Friday, I'll be visiting the Blue Mountains with Susan Templeman. Today, Murray Watt, our Shadow Minister, is in the Blue Mountains. This is a crisis and the government are very complacent. I wrote to the Prime Minister and asked for a COAG meeting to be convened. He wrote back and essentially the Prime Minister's attitude has been nothing to see here. Well, if there's nothing to see here, it's because they can't see through the smoke that's coming from these fires. The fact is that this government needs to respond far more. There's the issue as well of volunteer firefighters who've been in the field for months. The Prime Minister's response is they want to be there. These are people who are giving up their wages. They've still got to pay their mortgage, they've still got to pay their rent, they've still got to buy food for their families, they've got to pay for petrol to get to the fires as well. And these are brave and courageous Australians. They deserve more support than they're getting at the moment, and that's the feedback that I've had. And with regard to the Bushfire chiefs, former chiefs, it is also the case that the Prime Minister's refused to meet with them, and surely agreeing to participate in a summit with experts who have literally hundreds of years of experience is worthwhile listening to.
You've acknowledged that it's a bushfire crisis. You accuse the government of being complacent. Do you think then that the people of Australia might expect the Prime Minister might not go on holiday during this?
Well, look, I'm not going to be critical of Mr. Morrison personally in terms of his circumstances of taking leave with his family. I'm not going to do that. That would be cheap politics, and I'm not into that. I'm into the issues, and the issues that count are a national response. It doesn't matter whether it's Mr. Morrison or Michael McCormick. We're not seeing a proper response from this government. And on issues like the volunteer bushfire, volunteer fireys, they're saying, when I've met with them, they're saying they're exhausted. And this has gone on for a considerable period of time, and unfortunately it looks as though this will continue well into 2020, and the government needs to put together a clearer strategy to deal with these issues.
Mr. Albanese, in Victoria, AGL are looking to refire a coal-fired power station. Do you think all coal power stations should be re-owned for national energy security?
Well, what we need is a national energy plan. We need a national energy policy. We don't have one. So it's not a matter of, markets will determine what the economics are of projects. And the economics of projects are showing greatly that it is renewables that are cheaper than fossil fuels, that change has occurred over a period of time. And one would expect that will continue. But we need a national energy policy. At the moment, we don't have one, and we are suffering because of that. Because of that, investment is down, massively down this year compared with a year ago, and business want the certainty to be able to put that investment there.
What's your response to the latest banking scandal with NAB facing a fine of up to $10 billion?
Well, this is just a rolling series of scandals from the banks. Remember, the Morrison government and Scott Morrison voted against the Banking Royal Commission on 26 separate occasions. It's another area where the government has been complacent. Why is it that the government haven't yet legislated all the recommendations of the Banking Royal Commission? They said that they would. It hasn't happened because they've been too busy. Sorry? It's a very broad question. Well, I can't respond to a question that's that broad. I'm sorry. If some specifics is about employment, wages.
Yeah, in terms of employment and wages.
Right. Well, I haven't seen the report, but quite clearly we do need to. Previous reports that I have seen have shown there continues to be a gender pay gap, and those issues very much need to be addressed. But maybe, I don't know, Julie's seen the...
I haven't seen the report, no. But as Shadow Minister for Women, we are very concerned that the government, again, is not doing enough when it comes to the gender pay gap. There is no doubt that government intervention works when it comes to gender pay gap. Indeed, everybody says that the gap has remained consistent for nearly 2 decades, and the only difference has been during the mining boom and the drop-off of the mining boom. The only thing that seems to have made any difference was some of the reporting on the gender pay gap that Labor introduced last time we were in government. And this government is not doing anywhere near enough when it comes to dealing with the fact that women in Australia are still getting paid substantially less than men for the same type of work.
Thanks. Sure.
So the federal government is blaming the states for blackouts during the heatwave. Does the Prime Minister need to take responsibility for the reliability of the grid?
Look, the Prime Minister is responsible for not having an energy policy and for having a clown like Angus Taylor in charge of it, who, specialises in making misleading statements. He's been doing it since his first speech in the Parliament. He's too distracted trying to make cheap political points against a mayor in Sydney to do his day job. His day job should be to have a national energy policy. They don't have one. They don't have a renewable energy target into the future. They're not going to meet their Paris targets, and they went along to Madrid and argued for an accountancy fiddle rather than actually trying to achieve the outcomes to which Tony Abbott, as the Liberal Prime Minister, signed up to. It is just embarrassing, and they need to accept some responsibility. They're actually in charge of the country, and what we need is a national energy policy. We had one. They got rid of it when they came to office, and it's been replaced by 16 thought bubbles, the latest of which, number 17, was nuclear power plants. I don't know where they're going to go. Maybe Hobart, maybe Launceston. They need to say exactly where the good sites for nuclear power will be. But in the meantime, we have prices continuing to rise and our emissions rising. The fact is that action on climate change, which has to include a national energy policy, will be good for jobs, good in terms of driving down emissions and drive down energy prices. At the moment, there's a supply issue because the investment isn't happening, and that is a direct responsibility of the federal government. Thanks very much.
How can you criticise, though, the federal government for not having a policy on energy when you won't say whether you support new coal mines, you won't say whether you support reopening or reactivating old coal mines? You don't seem to have a policy on.
Well, what nonsense? Which one's being reactivated?
Well, we just heard in Victoria.
Which one?
It's not my question, but
No, it wasn't a mine.
No, but I said...
You said a mine,
No, I
he said a power plant.
You won't say whether you support new mines, and you won't say whether you support reactivation of old
No,
power
but
plants.
it's not up to me what it's up to. Indeed, the EPBC Act provides that any new proposals have to actually be made independent of political decision making and need to be made after environmental assessments are made based upon the science and recommendations. It's entirely inappropriate. I've said very clearly I do not believe there will be new coal-fired power plants built in Australia. If that was going to occur, it could have occurred. It can occur at any time. There's no law against it. The market is speaking, and the market is saying renewables are the cheapest form of new energy. Thanks very much. Sure.
Would they consider increasing the number of professional firefighters?
Well, look, that's the sort of thing that should be a part of a national strategy. How do we work with the full-time firefighters as well as volunteers? How do we make sure that we maximise the benefit which is there? There'll always be a role for the volunteers, but over a period of time, people who in the past have gone for a few weeks now are going for months, and it's simply not sustainable for them to do that. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Leader Anthony Albanese there in Hobart. We will have more on the various stories that he's discussed there.